welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jeremy James. I am managing partner at Ownet. We focus on transformation and assurance. And I'd like to also introduce my co-presenter, Jonas Hulstart from Software AG. Between us, we will be taking you through the third of our webinars in this series. And this webinar will be focused on accelerating the discovery and documentation of important business services. So today we will have a very brief look at what needs to be done by the 31st of March of next year. And then we will take a deeper dive into identifying your important business services and capturing the processes and enablers that support those business services. And this will really sort of set the scene for us to demonstrate how you can build a sustainable framework using the Software AG ARIS enterprise management capability and automated process mapping. And once we've taken you through that, we will then just summarize what needs to be done, what is urgent to start kicking off for each organization. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. During the webinar, please do post your questions and we will pick them up in that section. You should be able to see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So, as mentioned, we will now have a look at what needs to be done. So hopefully by now, majority of organizations have done their assessments, they've developed a strategy, started to design what needs to be done to actually execute on this program of work, initiated their projects, and started to think about the governance over the whole aspect of operational resilience. And now is the time for people to be really focusing on the implementation and execution. We will today be focused on identifying those important business services, mapping the supporting processes and capturing enablers. And that really sets the foundation for the organizations to then set the impact tolerances, test against various scenarios, and then identify the vulnerabilities and the remediation required and build the first self-assessment. And all of that needs to be completed by the 31st of March of next year. So there isn't a huge amount of time to get this done. And this is one of the reasons that we are very much focusing today on how we can accelerate that and ensure the accuracy of what is captured. Going forward, after the 31st of March, that's not the end of the program in any means. After that point, the remediation of any vulnerabilities has to be put in place. The mapping and the capture and the monitoring of your important business services will be taken down to a much more sophisticated level. And that will be something that will also be done in conjunction with the regulators. And off the back of this, all organizations will be building their self-assessments, and these are living self-assessments that will be signed off by the board on a regular basis. And therefore, the monitoring of ensuring that impact tolerances aren't breached, the remediation is complete, will carry on infinitum. But all the remediation of this first part will need to be done by 2025 at the latest. So to get all of this done, there will need to be structure of project management, a lot of communication through your organizations, and a focus on building this foundation, and hence what we're going to focus on now. So I just wanted to take a pause and think about what is an important business service. Now, within the regulation, this is defined as a service that is disrupted, could cause potential significant damage either to a client, the firm itself, or the broader financial market. Now, that's said from a definition of how you define that. However, there could be a definition that says that if you are delivering a service to any client or to any third party that could impact the financial markets, or a service that could impact your firm, you should be thinking of those as important. And therefore, you need to then think about how do we prioritize those important services. And this is where the pragmatism of making sure you don't overburden yourselves with having to map all the processes that support these, identify, the most granular level services that you have, becomes important so that you can focus ready for the 31st of March. So the start point that we see as a good point to start to put the focus on these is to first define a clear hierarchy. And this, is just one level that you could do this at. Each organization will be slightly different. And so therefore you need to think about these, take the time to make sure you get this part right. But you could define these by service, by product, by business, before you then start to think about your nature of your clients, the uniqueness of the services, the time criticality of a service, i.e., if it's down for 5 minutes, is that going to be an issue? If it's down for 3 days, we can actually live with that, therefore it becomes less material for here. Similarly with volume, the sensitivity of data, especially with personal data, if there's any form of breach, and with GDPR in the background as well. And then looking at it from an impact on financial and reputational position. And could it be that the disruption creates a legal concern? And by taking all of these elements, it is important that you have a clear structure and you build a clear logical catalogue of these services, so that when you are defining the prioritizations, and I do believe it is very important that you define a tier for materiality, so you can take this, have the discussions with your regulators on what do we need to see as our most important business services by the 31st of March 2022. And you'll find that within different business lines, you may have the same service that is material in one and a high priority and not in another. And that will maybe be driven by the nature of the client, or the volumes that you are processing within those within that service level. This part of the work is key because it is really the backbone of the operational resilience framework, and the need to actually make sure that the framework is something that is sustainable. And so at this point, I would actually sort of throw out the challenge or the question of, is there a capability of capturing a robust framework and capturing all the processes that underpin that framework, those important business services and the enablers that support those processes? Can you do that in the old manual fashion, or do you actually need to use automation, one, to accelerate it because the timeline is short, and two, because you need the accuracy to be able to really deliver on a sustainable and robust framework going forward? So Once you've got your important business services in place, it is important that you take the time to think about developing that enterprise management framework for operational resilience. Create a logical categorization of your business services, the supporting processes that underpin those, and then ensuring that you are able to have catalogues of all of your enablers, whether those be the people, the technology, the facilities, and the information. And that is very important if you want to be able to quickly identify the important business services that are being disrupted due to an issue with potentially some technology. And if people have captured technology using different terminology across your organization, you will not be able to see, as an example, that a CRM system has gone down if people have in one part of the business called it CRM X1 and other people have called it CRM X2, but meaning the same tool, but because they have different terminologies in either different business units or different parts of the operations. So this is where ensuring that governance over the framework really comes into it, and training your teams on how to map and collaborate well, putting this work together and ensure that they understand what that governance is to make this a robust framework. There's always a question of, is it a good idea to reuse existing information? And again, this is not a black and white answer. There is obviously an advantage of gathering information that you have in your organization already, whether that be from operational risk or business continuity, disaster recovery plans, from historical incidents that have occurred either at the firm level or an operational level, or even at a global or regional level. But trying to pull together a lot of process maps and catalogues of different enablers from different parts of your organization can create a real bottleneck in actually developing the framework itself. And we have seen this in a number of clients in the past, where people by nature want to say, well, we've got this, let's get it off the shelf. But once you start delving into it, the variation between the quality, the terminology, and the date and the historical element of when these processes were captured and their enablers makes it very difficult to then develop that into something new. So I would challenge you to actually think about gathering information for understanding purposes, but then thinking about using a green field site for actually driving your processes and enablers going forward. Now, before the 31st of March next year, the regulation is about mapping your processes that underpin your important business services to a level of sophistication that enables you to test against scenarios, identify your vulnerabilities, set your impact tolerances, and ultimately identify and perform remediation. So this is an area, again, that you should try not to do in a vacuum. Make sure you involve the regulators to understand what they see as the right level of sophistication for your organization, and make sure that you are capturing the right level of variance across your organization to be able to give you a full holistic picture of those processes that underpin those services. As I mentioned earlier, you may have the same business services being delivered in different functions. It does not mean that the processes will be identical across those functions and business units. Similarly, it does not mean that the people or technology, the facilitators or the data that underpin that will be the same. But what you will find advantageous is to be able to pull those variants together. And finally, I've already mentioned you need to obviously ensure that those end-to-end processes include your people, your technology, your facilities, and your information, i.e. your data. So here is where, you know, we come on to the short period of time we have for the 31st of March and the amount of work that needs to be done and the accuracy that it needs to be done by. And where I really like to explore the idea of using automation for process mapping. A lot of people have heard of robotic process automation. So this is running your processes using a robot. This is about using robots and process mining to be able to capture your processes in a very efficient manner, in a very accurate way that allows you to be able to focus on the analysis, building those impact tolerances, understanding vulnerabilities, understanding the scenarios, and ultimately building improved processes and further resilience. And this slide really is just to illustrate that in the old world where you were creating workshops to capture a lot of data and a lot of information, and it would take, you know, for one process in the period of 4 to 6 of FTE effort, and then another couple of weeks for pulling the modeling together. And after all of that, the processes are only as accurate as the people as you had in that room, and as far as, you know, the people who spoke the loudest in that room. So you won't necessarily capture your exact processes or even the accurate process. You may have a version of a variant of that process, and trying to use that as your base for remediation and sustaining a robust operational resilient organization is obviously going to be impaired. Whereas you put in automation, and that automation enables you without disruption to your people, capture completely objectively what they are doing, how they are doing it, with all of the attributes required as far as the enablers, so that you can really focus on what is actually happening in the business. And there are obviously more use cases for that information other than just running your operational resilience framework from an improvement, etc. perspective. So that's where I would really challenge everyone to think about looking at automation for the mapping, doing that heavy lifting to leave the value add to individuals. And what the automated process modeling ultimately delivers is that discovery of your processes, as I've already talked about. You can then easily, using AI, start to uncover the vulnerabilities and surface, you know, that objective information that underpin your services, and be able to get very deep insights into the factors that are going to potentially be the scenarios that endanger the resilience due to a defect or a default disruption. And ultimately, this gives you the visibility, the transparency to be able to, on an agile basis, focus on where your impacts are being are at risk and where you need to focus any remediation and improvement on those processes going forward. So now just with that little bit of background, we would like to move into the demonstration of the sustainable framework using ARIS itself. Now today, as briefly mentioned earlier, what we want to focus on is using the tool to be able to identify and capture important business services, mapping the processes, and that includes third-party processes, and that's a key part of the regulation. You need to make sure that it is broad, using automated process mapping, and then discovering and capturing those enablers. We will be running a series, further webinars in the series that will then look at the defining the impact tolerances and testing against scenarios and going into the analysis and remediation and the development of the self-assessment. But to complete the picture, Jonas will give a very brief taster of those last three elements. So at that point, I would like to pass over to Jonas to demonstrate how ARIS will facilitate the operational resilient framework. Jonas.
Perfect, thank you, Jeremy. Let me share my screen with everyone. Okay, so I hope everyone can see my screen now. Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, as Jeremy mentioned, identifying, capturing, and documenting your organization's business processes can be a daunting task. They often involve many workshops, brown paper sessions, shadowing of colleagues, going back and forth with drafts and models, and of course require a lot of time and resources. Now, what we have seen, especially with the new way of working many organizations have adopted, is that there is an increased need in accelerating and automating the capture of processes, not only to overcome challenges of people working from home or not being able to come together in workshops, but mainly to really increase the speed and quality of this work. And this, of course, where ARIS can help you. So the ARIS platform has two capabilities that together can provide you a full picture of your core processes. We have process mining and we have task mining. And together they make up the automated modeling capability. So let me just quickly explain those capabilities to you. Process mining uses the log files and event logs of all your systems to reconstruct the process end to end, including all the different ways how people have done the process, all the variants. So it requires system data, or we connect into systems directly, of course. But as you know, sometimes processes are not executed in business systems alone. They might be executed even on the likes of Excel or other applications that don't have log file information. Also, sometimes there's a need to understand what the user is actually doing in those systems. And this is where task mining comes in. Task mining uses software robots on employees' machines to capture all interactions they have with their computer. So every keystroke, every mouse click is being captured. And this technology works similar as process mining in the sense that it can recognize patterns and present you with the processes that multiple people are executing in the organization. And in addition, it also takes screenshots, which can be used as part of the business process documentation. So together, these technologies will provide you with an objective, data-driven view of your processes. So what you're looking at here is in fact the results of our process discovery exercise on the process, which is the client onboarding process. This screen just shows you just a few stats, kind of an overview of what we have been capturing. So the key stats for me here are that after our exercise, we have captured almost 2,000 processes. So 2,000 client onboarding processes have been analyzed. And we get some key information around how many we do per day, so about 14, and what is the throughput time. So how long does a process take end to end in average? So it's about 15 hours for our process. These are some key stats, but of course, what interests us is the actual process. How have different employees executed this process? So this brings me to the Process Explorer. And what this one does, it really reconstructs your process end to end. So we start in the top. We can see here that we first enter the application to the system. We check whether all personal details are completed. And of course, there's a number of tasks. And at the end, we open the client account. Very straightforward, as you can imagine. Now, this, what you're looking at, is the most commonly occurring path. This is the happy path in our process. So in most cases, your process, it can be quite complex. So we can, of course, abstract to any level of complexity. So here I want to add a bit more complexity, and I want to include all the activities that have been captured in this process and all the different connections. So what I get now is still a simplified view of the process, because for demo purposes, I don't want to make it too complicated here. But what we're looking at here is our client onboarding process and all the different ways how employees have executed this process. So what we see, for example, at the end, we don't only open the client account, which happens in about 90% of the cases, but in almost 10% of the cases, we close the account application, because, of course, the step before, which is the AML check, has come, of course, with some data that didn't allow us to proceed. We also can see here that there are some variants where people have bypassed certain activities. So in 400 cases, we haven't done those activities. So of course, it's worth looking in a bit more detail why this has happened. So process mining, of course, captures a lot of data. Task mining captures a lot of data around performance. So if you want to overlay, for example, let's say throughput time on your process, you can quickly see here where we might have some bottlenecks. So this will highlight bottlenecks, vulnerabilities in your process. So visually, we can see here that this activity here, for example, AML checks complete, which has been marked with kind of a darker shade of red, which means that this is an area to focus a bit more on a potential bottleneck in the process. But usually, when the focus is on documenting, which is the case here, it's on automatic discovery, what a business analyst would do is they would go to the variants and have a look at all the different variants of this process and select the ones that should be documented in ARIS as a standard way of working. Okay, so we have 8 variants in those processes, 8 different ways to execute this process. Usually you would capture, of course, the happy path, but of course a few exception paths that are allowed, and maybe some paths where there's some rework being done. So you would select a number of variants. In my case, I can select the top 3. This brings me to about 90% of the cases, which I think is a good number here. And this you can then just, with a click of a button, send to the ARIS Business Process Management platform for documentation. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to move to ARIS Connect and show you how this discover process has been then documented automatically in the repository. Okay, so for this, as I mentioned, I'm going to move to ARIS, the ARIS Connect platform. So ARIS Connect provides a central repository in which users can collaboratively work on all things operational resilience. Okay, so the power of ARIS is that it provides this collaborative environment on top of the benefits of a repository. So as Jeremy mentioned, instead of different teams coming up with their own names of systems, departments, other enablers, this information can be uploaded upfront in the database and then used in all the models, or it can be even synchronized with your HR systems, for example, Workday maybe, or maybe you have your application information in CMDB like ServiceNow. So we really make sure that everyone is working on one version of the same information, which of course helps greatly in analyzing vulnerabilities, something I want to demonstrate a bit later. Okay, so this is our landing page. You can see the different sections here on the landing page. It shows you also some of the information that can be captured as models or catalogs of information. So first of all, we have here the actual operational resilience policy, which can be navigated in ARIS to understand the full scope and see how it is related to other content in the repository. Central is the list of important services and also the underlying processes that deliver those services. And on the right, we have the enablers to those services, of those services. So these are the people, the systems, the data, and the facilities. Now, each of those areas can be drilled down to get more information. So let's maybe start with the service catalog. So if I just double click on the service catalog, I will see a simplified view of an organization's service catalog. So we have our banking and our insurance services. For today's demonstration, I will be drilling down into loans, and I get a level 2 service catalog. So within loans, we have mortgage and secured loans, we have unsecured loans, and overdrafts. Now, once you have identified your important services, you have imported them into ARIS, which will create these models for you. You can start to look at vulnerabilities and also define the impact tolerances of each service. So it's important to understand that within ARIS, these are objects. Okay, they are objects stored in a database, which can be reused on other models, as we will see later. But objects can also have metadata or attributes. So for example, mortgages and secured loans has some information around the impact tolerance that we have defined, 1 week. We have also some tick boxes, whether this has an impact on the client, the market integrity, the firm. So this is kind of data that you would capture at this stage. So all this information can be also exported into documents that can be used for compliance purposes. So just to illustrate this, we have a number of reports we can run off the back of this information. So here I have an example of an operational resilience self-assessment form. So this report will run off the back of this loans set of services and export it into a document you can use for compliance purposes. Okay, so services are realized by processes. So for today's demonstration, we will be focusing on one process, which we saw already was a client onboarding process. So if I just double click on it, normally I would see, of course, all the services realizing the service, sorry, all the processes realizing the service. But for today, I want to focus on onboarding of the client only. So what I have here is our process, which has been discovered by our automated discovery capability, which I've shown you at the beginning of the demo. Okay, so this is the end result. What process mining will provide you is the flow of the selected variants. So I've selected 3 variants. This is the flow that has been generated. Of course, once this has been generated, we can then enrich it with the enablers of the processes. So the systems, the people, the data, and the facilities. So let me just maybe zoom in and briefly explain this flow to you. So as we saw, our process starts with entering the application into the system. We have here some other activities that take place, such as check all personal details are completed, check company details are completed, and so on. So process mining and task mining will give you together the flow, any kind of events in the process, any kind of decision points, they will all be mapped out here. In cases where task mining has been used to get a more granular level, we can even go to the work instruction level, okay, the user action level. So as you notice, we have some tasks here that have these little icons. They mean that I can drill down and get more information about how do we perform AML checks? What exactly do we do? So here, if I click on it and maybe view the steps view of this process, which is a different view generated by ARIS, I can step-by-step walk through the process to understand how we should be doing, in this case, AML checks. So first of all, in this example, we have captured automatically by the robots that we first go to Excel. Okay, we have a mock-up system that we have built in Excel. This is the name. We click copy on an account of a customer. We go then to the company's house as an example, where we click companies. We click paste and search a register and so on. So as you can imagine, this is generated automatically, and of course is very well suited to provide work instructions to the end user and to really understand how are they executing the process to really a great level of detail. So this is what you get from the automated process modeling. What I want to show you now is also how, of course, we can add some more enablers to this process. So this process has been created in the BPMN notation. So this is a swim lane notation. So for those familiar with this notation, if you have a look, you will see that the swim lanes represent roles. So here we have, for example, client onboarding, the head of client onboarding. So all activities that are placed within the swim lane are executed by this role. We also can see which systems are supporting each activity. So they are represented by the swim lanes tool and by this application icon. So our first activities are executed by or supported by the CRM system. We also have a compliance system in here. So those enablers are other objects in the repository, which of course enables you to analyze the interdependencies and the vulnerabilities. So if I just focus on one of those enablers, let me just make this a bit bigger again. So let me want to focus, for example, on the people first. Okay, so if you want to know what compliance are doing within this process, we can go to the highlighting section, and then we can choose one of the enablers we want, whether it's a system or here a role, and I can choose compliance, and I quickly can see on this model what the compliance team are doing. But of course, the compliance team are also doing activities in other processes. And if you want to have a view of that, we can simply select the compliance swim lane and have a look at its related models. So this will show me a list of processes where compliance are also doing some activities or playing a role in. So as you can imagine, if something happens to the compliance team, you have immediate visibility on which processes and services will be disrupted. So as you can imagine, once you document a process that has been automatically discovered, there's some cases where you want maybe to make some changes to the model, okay, where you want to edit the model, maybe add some activities, make it a bit more, for example, clearer for certain use cases. So if you want to edit the model, all of this also works within the same environment. So I can simply decide to edit this model. And if I say, for example, there's a step missing which I want to document, or maybe a new best practice I want to implement in the organization, so I want to add to the existing process, we can simply insert a task here within the process. And ARIS smart modeling capabilities will know what kind of objects to use there, where to position them, and so on. To show the kind of the reuse capabilities, once I start adding a task to the model, and I start typing. So for example, I want to maybe check the contract first. Once I start typing check, I will get all tasks with the name check, or with check in the name. So ARIS will always try to help you with finding the right objects from the database, whether this is a system or a role or a task in this case. Okay, so in this way, I can now just add another task in my system. And the next step, of course, would be to add some enablers. So the enablers can be added in the properties. You can add, for example, other responsibilities. Maybe you want to add who has to be informed of this activity or who's accountable. We can add IT systems, inputs, outputs, locations, and so on. Okay, so to illustrate this, I can just add a location here. I know this activity is executed in one of our customer service centers. So if I start typing customer service center, I can choose from the list, which has been predefined, choose the right customer service center. And this will automatically create a relationship between this customer service center and my activity. So this relationship will be, of course, captured in the database and is ready for all types of analysis. Okay, so the same, of course, works by adding the IT systems. You just click on the add, and then you start typing, and you will get all systems, which I mentioned can be pulled from your system catalog, from other tools, for example. Okay, so once I'm happy with it, I can, of course, save it, which I won't do in this case now. So yeah, with the modeling I showed you, you can quickly make some changes to a discovered model just to fine tune it, or maybe you want to improve it whilst doing it. In some cases, we have also noticed that we have one standard model, which is in this case, our onboarding of a customer across the whole organization. But there might be cases where you want to use variants. Okay, you might say you have maybe some regional variation of a process depending on some local regulations, or you might have different type of products. So in an ARIS, we can also manage this as what we call variants. So in this case, I have a variant, which is the variant, the Scottish variant of the same process. So I could here, for example, compare those different variants and see what are the differences, and also, again, report on the differences. It's all about having this really control over your processes, know what's happening, and being able to just get the full picture. Okay, so we looked at the service catalog. From there, we looked at the supporting business processes. We can, however, also focus on the enablers and analyze the services and processes that will be impacted should a disruption occur. So if I want to focus, for example, on systems, I can navigate to my system landscape. My system landscape can be just a flat list of systems that are supporting my core services, or they can be a model that shows, for example, by area, by business area, what are our core systems. So for example, within marketing and sales, we have our CRM system. Okay, so I can also start from here, select my CRM system. And as we have seen before, I can have a look at all the related models and see here, what are the processes that rely on our CRM system? So should the CRM system be down, what are the services that will be impacted, and the processes that will be impacted directly? Okay, so onboard client, as we know, is here. So if I click on it, I open the model, but I will zoom in directly on the application layer. So I can get the information not only on the level of the service and the level of the process, but also each individual task in the organization. I will see what will be impacted and also which people will be impacted, because I get a relationship to the role, which also is captured. So I know which people are working in which systems to execute which tasks. Okay, so we have identified our important services. We have discovered and documented the processes realizing the services. We have linked them to the enablers and assigned impact tolerances. Now, the next step that we probably want to do is monitor those processes to show the real impact on our tolerance levels. Okay, and this is where process mining can help us again. So after doing the discovery, process mining can continuously monitor your processes. So in our case, the client onboarding processes can be continuously monitored, and we can compare all those executed processes to how it should be, to the design in ARIS. We can compare it to the impact tolerances and any other KPIs that you have defined about the process. Okay, so this is an example of conformance. Conformance means how well are our people executing the tasks according to the rules that we have defined. So here we can see, for example, that we have about 67% of conformance rates, which means that 67% of our processes are fully conforming or conforming to the standards that we have defined, which is not that great. Now, what is good is that we have a fitness value of 97. This means that even if people haven't followed the process step by step, they still have met most of the requirements. That's why we have a high fitness rate. Now, this gives you kind of of course, a high level view. From a business analysis point of view or business improvement point of view, you probably want to have a look at the analysis and see what kind of conformance issues do we have. So in this case, the conformance issues are just quite simple of one type. We have an unexpected consecutive activity. So people have been doing things in the wrong order. Okay, this might be against certain regulations. Okay, we can analyze this here, but it also might be something that is just something that just has an impact on performance. And this is the case here. So here we can see that the throughput time, we lost about 3 hours in average because of those non-compliant processes, which of course has quite an impact on the cost. Okay, so that's it for me. Hope this demo has given some ideas on how automated modeling can help you accelerate your operational resilience activities. So I will hand back over now to Jeremy.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jonas. So as Jonas said, and I was mentioning earlier, I hope that from that brief demonstration, you are able to see the power of using automation to capture, identify, map your important business services and their supporting processes and enablers. And that's where we have obviously focused. And, but that's not the the end of what you need to be able to do. You need to, at that point, and Jonas mentioned these through the demo, is be able to then set your impact tolerances, start the testing, identify any vulnerabilities and prepare remediation plans, all by the 31st of March next year, which is not a long period of time. And you need to make sure that you are discussing with your regulators to get to the right level of sophistication and to the prioritization of what important business services you need to have focused on at that point. Once you get through the 31st of March, there is still work to be done, as I said before, where you will obviously focus on the remediation and the continuing performance of the activities to remain within those impact tolerances. Until the 31st of March 2025, you have to have remediated all those vulnerabilities. But for the most important business services, for systemic organizations, those remediations will be required to be completed earlier than that date. And again, that will be driven by the conversations that you are having with the regulator. So I think, just to sum up, hopefully everybody has now got a program in place. It is time to really do what I'm going to call the grunt work and push forward on identifying mapping processes, understanding all the KPIs around impact tolerances, etc., and make sure that you have a robust foundation to take this forward. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I do believe that automation really will facilitate the acceleration of getting this done, but in some ways, more importantly, the accuracy to make this more than a tick box exercise and something that is robust going forward. So we've got a number of questions that have been come through, and please feel free to add any more. We have, just under 15 minutes to go through these. So I'll just start with them in sort of a chronological order as they've come in. But please do add some others if you feel that as we go through these. So there was one question which was, should we inventorize business services and then categorize them as important? So I don't mind taking this one, Jonas. Absolutely, you should be capturing all of your business services to be able to understand what of those are the most important and prioritizing them. There is a slight difference between the definition that you have from the regulator of an important business service, which is, that it will have impact on a client, on the firm, or on the wider market. But as an organization, you may want to be looking at these as, if we're doing a service and we're delivering on that service, it is important to somebody. But it doesn't mean that in your priority for the regulation, it is going to be one that you're going to start mapping early on. So I hope that answers that question. The second question that has arisen is, sorry, I'm just trying to get the language of this one. So they've come across discovery capability in the context of RPA and RPA running a process. But how does that relate to the discovery of the processes and items themselves? So Jonas, do you want to cover that one?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, so we cover two capabilities, process mining and task mining. So process mining comes more from a business process management point of view, with a focus on identifying things like bottlenecks in processes, continuous improvement, which is a very valid use case too. Task mining comes indeed from the RPA space. And with task mining, the initial idea was, of course, to analyze for automation potential in a process. So it would analyze what people are doing and find the best opportunities for automation. And this is still a valid use case. We do use those technologies for automation. So we do offer also one-click automation where we can identify the process. You've seen the onboarding of a customer and the activity below it. So how we perform the email checks can be automated using a robot. But also what I think is interesting and probably more related to our discussion today, that the robot doesn't need to replace the person, doesn't need to do the work. We also work with some organizations where we deploy robots as so-called guide me bots. So guide me bots are in fact guiding employees to perform a certain process, which is very useful for onboarding, again, speeds up the onboarding, but also I think in operational resilience. So let's say a certain person can't do their work. Another person can just, do parts of it with a guide me robot, kind of a personal assistant guiding you through the process.
Thanks, Jonas. I think just to add to that as well, the task mining, so the bot is sat on an individual's device and it is recording what they do. It does not disrupt the individual. It is all in the background, and therefore you're going to capture everything that is being done by multiple people in a team, and therefore you are getting that objective view of what is being done, so you can build a robust framework within that. So the next question was, you've talked a lot about accelerating the capture of processes. But how long does it take to install the automated process modeling software? It's a very good question, because obviously if it's going to take 12 months to do it, then there's no point really, is there? So the actual software, it's all SaaS related. So you're in the cloud. The actual implementation from signing the contract, getting the keys for it, is within 24 hours. So within that, then deploying for task mining the bots onto devices, that can be done through an automated fashion and would take no more than a couple of days of pushing that through and being able to then configure the operational resilience framework. Can take probably around 10 to 15 days to actually get the configuration right for you before you want people taking the automated models and then analyzing those and pulling them together. So the actual time frame to deliver is very, very short as far as installing and getting the setup right on that. The next question that came up is privacy for us is a big concern. How do you ensure sensitive data is not at risk? Again, I don't mind taking this one. So within the tool itself, when the bots or the process mining for that automated process modeling is happening, there are a number of ways that data is protected. Obviously, data is fully encrypted, but you can also limit what is being captured by the tools by blacklisting, whitelisting certain applications. So, if an individual is obviously in their lunch break and they want to look up their bank account and their personal details, you will not be capturing that type of information. You are also able to mask sensitive data so that, again, when people are doing analysis, they are unable to see personal data, etc. And that's all done through the configuration of how you want the level of data to be captured. And there are a number of other areas that within that ensure that the data is kept very secure. Another question that has come in is what re the benefits you're, oh, sorry, what are the benefits you're seeing implementing this at your customers? I don't know, Jonas, do you want to talk about some of the
First,
stuff?
we did actually do some analysis on the benefits. So some customer data has shown us on the project last year that we've seen a reduction of about 60 to 80% in time it takes to document a process. And I think those numbers are very similar to the ones Jeremy shared in the presentation around how long it usually takes to work with an SME, for example, to first establish the process, then document it. So we saw an improvement of about 60 to 80% in time. And something that's probably a bit more difficult to measure was the quality improvements. Because again, we work with objective data, what actually happens. So there's still an analyst and subject matter needed, but you really work with objective data. So the quality has been really improved. And again, something probably difficult to measure.
Brilliant, thanks, Jonas. So the next question, it sounds great that you can capture all this information automatically. How is it kept up to date? Again, I don't mind taking this. So again, a good question. Jonas did touch on in the demo around conformance. So there are different ways that you can utilize the automated process modeling. You can use it on a project basis. So you take it, you model a process, you put it into ARIS, you've captured that, and then off you go to the next place, and you move your bots and you take log files for your process mining from other areas. Alternatively, you can have constant capture of those processes or periodic capture of those processes. And then you are able to capture those, look at where the variants are between what you had designed and what the new as is, and decide, is that within conformance, or is that actually a change that we want to then develop into the design itself? And that capability was, as I say, touched on by Jonas, from when you capture the data within the automated process modeling capability and then move it into ARIS, you can compare the two and then make the changes to that designed model. All of those changes, all of the historical models are also kept. So you have a full audit trail of where those are as well. And similarly, Jonas mentioned about having variants. You may find that you have a variant by function or by business unit, even within a region. You're able to then have those side by side and actually look to bring further resilience to those processes by improvement. And that gives you the ability to analyze those against each other and also simulate through those processes as well. Next question. I'm just conscious we have a couple of minutes left, but we still have 3 or 4 questions here. We are using ARIS for BPM. Can we add the automated modeling capability, and are there any prerequisites? Jonas, you might be better.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the automated modeling capability is, as we call, almost of a bolt-on capability that you can add on top of your current kind of ARIS footprint. So yeah, it can be easily added. And there are no prerequisites really for our enterprise customers. Jeremy mentioned these are SaaS products, and they can be, of course, integrated into your ARIS environment easily.
Thank you. The next one is, you have focused this capability on capturing process information for operational resilience. What other use cases could this have, e.g. process improvement? Yeah, so obviously the webinar has been focused on operational resilience, but as you've obviously seen from this question, the use cases for using ARIS for enterprise process management is not narrowed down just to operational resilience. And you are able to incorporate operational resilience into your wider business process management capability across the organization. And that enables you, obviously, to reduce risk of transformation, help with ongoing assurance across any other regulatory matters, or looking at it from a compliance perspective. And obviously there is continuous process improvement as well, and allowing people to be empowered through the collaboration in the tool to make those changes in a controlled and governed manner. And because of all the information being in that single database, you will be able to see, and I'm going to come back to operational resilience, you'll be able to see where someone's suggesting a change and how would that potentially impact the operational resilience framework and the impact tolerances and vulnerabilities. And that can be flagged to the right person at the right time so that they can ensure that that's fed back into the self-assessment and the ongoing monitoring. And I think we have one last question. So I will quickly go over that with 1 minute over time, but what approach would you advise in a situation where some of the as-is processes are not up to date? So I don't mind taking this one. Maybe you want to jump in, Jonas, after, but what I would suggest in this situation is you use the historical as-is maps for high-level different maps together to try and create the new one. It is much easier to go back to a greenfield site, whether that be bringing people into a workshop and using the skeleton to say, okay, guys, where is the deltas from where we are now? Or, as I would probably advocate, use the automated process modeling to get a very objective variance. So that's we're over time. That was all the questions that came through. So finally, I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody for attending the webinar. This is recorded and we will be posting this onto our website for those, if you know people who may be interested in watching it. And follow-on sessions to look at setting impact tolerances, testing scenarios, analysis of vulnerabilities and remediation, and creating self-assessments. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.